My name is Sophie Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and at 7:50 the morning after my wedding, my sister called me screaming so loudly that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had thrown champagne across my reception, shoved both hands into my wedding cake, and sent 6 tears crashing onto the floor. Then she pointed at me in front of 140 guests and shouted, "This is what you get for acting like you're better than everyone." I expected my father to remove her. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her while frosting dripped from my dress and said, "She just needs to let it out." I didn't cry or argue. I didn't reveal what I was thinking while my sister sobbed against his jacket as though she had been attacked. I finished the ceremony, thanked my guests, and left with my new husband. That night, while my family assumed I was too humiliated to respond, I opened the account containing my sister's college tuition deposit. Then I contacted the manager of the apartment lease I had co-signed and invoked the withdrawal clause my attorney had added. By sunrise, the tuition payment was frozen and her luxury apartment application had been suspended. At exactly 7:50, my phone lit up with her name. "What did you do?" she shrieked. I looked across the hotel room at my husband and realized my sister had never believed I would stop protecting her. Before I tell you what I said, and why that call was only the beginning, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels. To understand why one frozen payment terrified Madison, you need to understand the arrangement our family had spent years pretending was normal. We grew up in northern New Mexico, where my father, Richard Bennett, ran a commercial heating repair company and my mother, Diane, handled its accounts from our home. We were not rich, but my parents cared deeply about looking successful. Our holiday photographs showed a close, ambitious family, while inside the house, Madison and I occupied very different roles. She was the sensitive, gifted daughter whose mistakes required patience. I was the dependable daughter whose achievements created new obligations. When Madison failed a class, my mother blamed the instructor. When I earned a scholarship, my father asked whether I could contribute to household bills. When Madison abandoned her first design program, everyone gathered to reassure her. When I completed my degree while working 2 jobs, they asked me to drive her to appointments because she was experiencing a difficult transition. That phrase explained every unpaid card, abandoned course, damaged car, and month she spent in my spare room without paying rent. Our grandmother Evelyn was the only person who challenged this pattern. After working as a librarian for 40 years, she left separate educational trusts for us. Mine funded graduate school. Madison's had already been reduced because our parents approved payments for 2 programs she never completed. About $42,000 remained when she applied for a master's degree in performance space design. Grandma named me successor custodian because she did not trust my parents to enforce the rules. The money could cover tuition, required materials, and modest housing, but not vacations, expensive furniture, consumer debt, or unrelated purchases. Madison hated asking me for disbursements. My parents hated it more. "She's 31, Dad often said. She shouldn't need her little sister's permission." I reminded him that these were restricted funds, not wages I was withholding. 3 months before my wedding, Madison found an apartment near campus in a converted warehouse with exposed brick, rooftop lounges, covered parking, and rent far beyond what the trust permitted. Her freelance staging income was inconsistent and her credit was damaged, so the building demanded a guarantor. My parents refused because they were refinancing their home. Then they pressured me. I initially said no, but Madison accused me of sabotaging her education, Mom cried, and Dad said marriage had made me selfish. Eventually, I agreed under strict conditions. Madison had to remain enrolled full-time, maintain academic standing, pay her portion of the rent, and use the trust only for approved expenses. My attorney added a clause allowing me to withdraw before possession if fraud, threats, misrepresentation, or dangerous conduct created financial risk. Madison laughed as she signed it without reading the final page. Her move-in date and tuition deadline were both scheduled for the Monday after my wedding. Before releasing the money, I discovered that the university had placed her admission under review because several portfolio renderings resembled another designer's work. Madison called it a software mistake. The school permitted her to continue temporarily, but her enrollment remained conditional. I told her payment would be made after the university confirmed her eligibility. She stared across my kitchen island and said, "You love having power over me." I answered, "I want you to meet the requirements." 1 week before the wedding, she messaged me at 2:13 a.m. "One day, you'll understand how humiliating it feels when everyone watches you fail." When I asked whether it was a threat, she sent a laughing emoji and accused me of being dramatic. I saved the message. I still invited her to the wedding, but I gave her no role, no vendor information, and no access to anything important. My parents complained that she would feel rejected. I did not explain that I had finally learned something about Madison. When she believed something important belonged to me, she did not simply want an equal version. She wanted proof that I could lose mine. Ethan and I chose San Aurelio Station, an abandoned railway depot outside Santa Fe that my restoration team had spent 3 years rebuilding. When I first entered it, the plaster was cracked, the windows were boarded, and part of the ceiling had collapsed. By our wedding day, the original tiles had been restored, the timber reinforced, and the ticket counter converted into a bar. Ethan was an acoustic engineer who had consulted on the station's reception hall. Our relationship grew during inspections, construction meetings, and late dinners on the loading platform. Madison called it a professional networking romance. But the station represented something she never respected: patient work. 10 days before the wedding, the florist received an email requesting white roses instead of desert wildflowers. The sender used my full name and event number, but an address differing from mine by 1 letter. 2 days later, the caterer received a request to add 12 guests and bill my card. Then the bakery was told to change the inscription inside our cutting cake to "Second place still counts." Each vendor contacted me before making changes. I did not accuse Madison. I changed passwords, created a verification phrase, and asked vendors to preserve the messages. My parents said the staff was probably confused. Madison said I was paranoid. At dinner, she sliced bread slowly and remarked, "Not everything is an attack." Ethan later asked whether I still wanted her invited. I said removing her without proof would create the public rejection she wanted. He contacted security anyway. 3 nights before the ceremony, Madison arrived with a champagne-colored, heavily beaded gown that appeared white beneath our kitchen lights. When I told her it was inappropriate, she asked whether I was afraid people might look at her. I answered, "I'm afraid you're deliberately creating an argument." Her expression softened the instant Ethan entered. She complimented him and behaved as if nothing had happened. After she left, he said, "She wanted you to ban her." The morning before the wedding, Mom called asking me to release $8,000 for specialized equipment. When I requested an invoice, she admitted the money was actually for Madison's security deposit, moving expenses, and furniture. I refused because the trust did not cover luxury furnishings. Mom accused me of punishing Madison for not having my career. Before hanging up, she said, "Please don't make your sister feel small tomorrow." No one had asked Madison not to make me feel small at my own wedding. That evening, we held a welcome gathering at the station. Madison arrived 40 minutes late wearing the champagne dress. Dad immediately whispered, "Let it go." I did. She behaved pleasantly for an hour, then told Ethan's aunt that everyone was relieved I had found something I could not manage in a spreadsheet. When a colleague congratulated me on leading a theater restoration in Denver, Madison said I had been fortunate with office politics. I pulled her aside and asked what she wanted. "Nothing," she replied. "I'm tired of everyone acting like you rebuilt civilization because you repaired an old building." I asked whether she had contacted my vendors. She smiled and denied wasting her time on flowers and cakes. Then she said, "Tomorrow is the first time everyone will finally be looking in the right direction." Dad approached and asked what I had done to upset her. When I repeated her words, he sighed. "She's under enormous pressure. Try not to provoke her." That sentence explained our entire family. Madison was allowed to create danger, while everyone else was responsible for not activating it. Ethan and I reviewed security that night. The microphone would remain with the band leader, vendor areas would be restricted, and my belongings would stay in a locked office. For most of the next day, Madison behaved perfectly. She arrived in a dark green dress, posed for photographs, and hugged me before the ceremony. Then an assistant handed me an envelope found beneath the bridal room door. Inside was Madison's conditional enrollment notice. Across the bottom, someone had written in red ink, "You can't hide this forever." It was not my secret, but the message made it look like evidence I had concealed. I locked it away and walked toward the ceremony, wondering whether Madison was preparing a story in which I had ruined her future. The ceremony was peaceful. Madison sat beside our parents without interrupting, and for 20 minutes the day belonged to Ethan and me. Afterward, guests moved into the restored waiting hall for dinner and speeches. We had banned open microphones, but my mother used her approved toast to praise Ethan for bringing stability into my life before speaking at length about how difficult new chapters could be for sisters. She asked everyone to hold space for relatives struggling with change. Several guests looked confused. Madison stared into her wineglass, smiling. I ignored it. The reception continued until one of my former professors congratulated me on the Denver project. Madison appeared beside us and said, "Ask Sophie how she removes opportunities from other people's paths." I asked her to step outside. She refused. "Why? So you can control what everyone hears?" Ethan approached, but Dad reached her first. She turned on him and said, "Don't pretend you care now." Mom touched her shoulder. Madison pulled away, grabbed champagne from a passing tray, and announced that she wanted to make a toast. The band stopped. I told her there would be no additional speeches. She raised the glass. "To Sophie, the woman who built a perfect life by making everyone else look irresponsible." I ordered her to put it down. She laughed and faced the room. "My sister controls my tuition. She decides whether I have a home next week." Murmurs spread. Her statement contained fragments of truth stripped of every condition. I explained that the Educational Trust had legal requirements and that my wedding was not the place to discuss them. "There!" she shouted. "Even now, she talks like a contract. She doesn't rescue people. She keeps records until they're desperate enough to beg." The accusation struck me because I had always feared becoming controlling. Madison had transformed responsibility into cruelty and presented herself as proof. Ethan stepped beside me and said, "This ends now." Madison warned him that I would abandon him the first time he disappointed me. Security moved closer, but Dad blocked them, insisting he could calm her. That protection gave Madison confidence. When a colleague said the evening was not a competition, she snapped, "There was never a competition. They decided she won before I knew we were being compared." She threw the champagne glass. It missed me, shattered against the dessert table, and cut a catering assistant's arm. Ethan pulled me back. Security grabbed Madison's wrist, but Dad seized the guard's shoulder and demanded her release. Madison twisted free and rushed toward the 6-tier display cake decorated with copper sugar leaves and patterns based on the station's tiles. I saw her intention and said, "Don't." Looking directly at me, she placed both hands against the middle tiers and pushed. The top layer slid sideways, the internal frame collapsed, and frosting, sugar leaves, glassware, and 3 heavy edible tears crashed across the floor. One struck the hem of my gown. Madison stood over the wreckage with frosting on her palms and screamed, "This is what you get for acting like you're better. You don't get to parade your perfect life in front of me." I looked at Dad, expecting him to see the injured worker, broken glass, horrified guests, and destruction. Instead, he stepped around the cake and pulled Madison into his arms. "She just needs to let it out," he said. Those words changed me more than the cake. Mom cried because security wanted Madison removed. Dad called it an emotional crisis and asked Ethan to show compassion. Neither checked whether I was injured. Over Dad's shoulder, Madison stared at me calmly. She believed the usual process had begun. She would explode, our parents would protect her, and I would absorb the cost. I said nothing. My silence unsettled her. "Say something," she demanded. I looked at the wreckage and quietly told security to remove her. Dad argued until Ethan's brother said Madison would either leave voluntarily or be removed by police. Our parents finally escorted her outside while she shouted that the family would regret humiliating her. The coordinator offered to end the reception. I looked at Ethan and realized Madison had destroyed an object, not our marriage. "Move the table, clean the glass, and bring out the sheet cakes," I said. 28 minutes later, the music resumed. We danced, thanked our guests, and stayed until the final song. At 11:34 that night, inside our hotel room, I removed my hairpins, opened my laptop, and reviewed every document connected to Madison's trust and lease. Ethan sat across from me while I created a timeline: the fraudulent vendor emails, the threatening message, the enrollment investigation, the false accusations, the thrown glass, the injured employee, the destroyed cake, and Madison's final threat. I emailed the university's financial office and instructed them not to accept tuition funds until her academic review was resolved. I was not taking Madison's inheritance. I was preventing a restricted trust from paying into a program that had not confirmed her eligibility. Then I contacted the apartment manager. Because Madison had not taken possession, the deposit remained unpaid, and my guarantor agreement contained a risk clause. I withdrew. The manager called at 12:18 a.m. He had already heard about the incident because a relative of one employee attended the wedding. Without my guarantee, Madison no longer met the building's income requirements. She had until noon to find another guarantor or qualify independently. At 12:41, I changed the trust password and removed her informal viewing access. I also canceled an expensive furniture delivery Mom had arranged using my card information from a previous purchase. Finally, I forwarded the threatening messages and fraudulent vendor emails to my attorney. Ethan asked whether I was certain. "I've been sleeping through this for years," I said. At 1:06, Dad called. "Your mother and I are with Madison. She's devastated." I waited for him to ask about me. He did not. He said she knew she had gone too far, but she was in no condition to speak. When I mentioned the injured employee, he called it an accident. When I mentioned the cake, he called it an emotional break. When I described the messages and enrollment notice, he claimed I lacked proof. Then he asked, "What have you done?" I told him I paused the tuition distribution. His voice hardened. "Out of revenge?" I explained that the trust could not pay while her admission remained conditional. He accused me of hiding behind paperwork. Mom took the phone and pleaded. "She has already lost so much." I asked what Madison had lost. Mom listed her confidence, her relationship with me, and her place in the family. "She destroyed my reception 3 hours ago, and you're describing her losses?" I asked whether Mom knew the injured worker's name or had apologized to Ethan's parents. She did not. I told them that for my entire life, every consequence Madison created became an emergency I was expected to solve. She quit, and I encouraged her. She spent money, and I covered it. She threatened me, and I was told to understand her pain. She destroyed my wedding, and they called because she felt embarrassed. Tonight, I'm done financing the belief that she can do anything to me and still receive everything she wants on Monday morning. When I revealed that I had also withdrawn from the apartment lease, Dad finally shouted. He had not become furious over the broken glass or injured employee. He became furious only when I refused financial risk. He said I would make Madison homeless. I reminded him that she still lived in their house and had not moved into the apartment. He could guarantee the lease if he believed she presented no risk. He admitted his refinancing prevented him. "Then you understand why I won't do it," I said. He accused me of choosing a stranger over my sister. I looked at Ethan, who had protected me from flying glass while Dad comforted the person who threw it. "No," I said. "I'm choosing people who don't hurt me and call it love." I ended the call, turned off my phone, and went to sleep. When I turned my phone on the next morning, it displayed 19 missed calls, 8 from Madison, 6 from my mother, 4 from my father, and 1 from an unknown Albuquerque number. The first voicemail from Madison had been recorded at 6:52. Her voice was controlled. "Call me. There's a problem with the tuition portal." At 7:11, she sounded irritated. "You had no authority to remove my access." At 7:26, she said the apartment building had suspended her move-in. At 7:43, she accused me of trying to ruin her life. Then, at 7:50, she called again while I was looking at the screen. I answered. "What did you do?" she screamed. "I followed the trust conditions and withdrew from your lease." "You can't do that." "I already did. My movers are coming tomorrow. My classes start next week. Your enrollment is conditional. That investigation is nothing. Then the university can confirm that, and the trust can reconsider payment. You're punishing me because of a cake." "No, I'm ending financial support because you threatened me, interfered with my vendors, made false public statements, destroyed property, injured someone, and demonstrated that guaranteeing your lease would expose me to further risk." She laughed once, a sharp sound with no humor. "Listen to yourself. You sound insane." "I have documentation." "You always have documentation. That's your sickness." "No, Madison. Documentation is what prevents you from rewriting what happened." Her breathing changed. I could hear movement and my mother speaking in the background. Madison said, "You promised Grandma you'd take care of me. I promised to administer the trust. She wanted me to finish school. So do I, but she did not instruct me to release money regardless of eligibility. You know I can't afford tuition without it. Then cooperate with the investigation." "And the apartment?" "Find another guarantor or choose housing you can qualify for. You know Dad can't sign." "That doesn't make the obligation mine." She began crying, but the crying did not soften her words. "You waited until after the wedding because you wanted maximum damage. I waited until you gave me a legally documented reason to withdraw. You're doing exactly what I said you do. You keep records until you can destroy people." I almost defended myself. Then I recognized the trap. She needed me to debate my character so the conversation would move away from her conduct. "The decisions are final," I said. Her crying stopped. "You think Ethan is going to stay when he sees what you're really like?" He was sitting beside me when I made the calls. Silence. That was the moment she began to panic in a different way. Until then, she had assumed Ethan would restrain me, persuade me to forgive her, or fear being blamed for the family division. Learning that he supported the boundaries meant she could not isolate me from my marriage as easily as she had isolated me within our family. Madison lowered her voice. "Put him on." "No. I want to hear him say he agrees with this. My husband is not part of your financial arrangement. You're afraid he'll tell the truth." I ended the call. 10 minutes later, my father sent a message stating that Madison had a right to appeal my decision. My attorney responded on my behalf. The trust agreement allowed educational expenses only for verified enrollment in good standing. The university's review prevented immediate disbursement. The apartment guarantee was a separate voluntary agreement that I had lawfully withdrawn before possession. There was nothing to appeal through our parents. By noon, 3 additional consequences appeared. The injured catering assistant filed an incident report and requested reimbursement for medical treatment. The station's insurance company opened a property damage claim. The bakery invoiced us for the destroyed display, but our coordinator provided video showing Madison's deliberate act, shifting liability toward her. Because the venue was connected to my employer, Madison's behavior also circulated among several arts organizations where she had hoped to find design work. I did not distribute the footage. I asked guests not to post it. But too many people had witnessed the incident for secrecy to survive. Madison blamed me anyway. She created a social media post claiming she had suffered a panic attack after years of financial abuse. She wrote that I used inherited money to control her education and housing, then weaponized legal language after provoking her at the wedding. The post omitted the thrown glass, the false vendor requests, the academic investigation, and the fact that the account was a restricted trust rather than my personal money. For several hours, comments supported her. Strangers called me controlling. A few said no sibling should oversee another sibling's education. I considered responding emotionally. Instead, my attorney helped me issue one statement. Because this matter involves a restricted educational trust, pending academic review, property damage, and potential legal claims, I will not debate it publicly. Relevant records have been provided to the appropriate institutions. I posted nothing else. That restraint mattered. 2 days later, the catering assistant's representative requested preservation of all videos. The venue provided security footage. The florist, caterer, and bakery supplied the fraudulent messages. One email account had been accessed from a device connected to my parents' home network. That did not prove which person sent it, but it narrowed the possibilities. My mother admitted that Madison had used their computer repeatedly during the week before the wedding. Then the university completed the first phase of its portfolio review. 3 of Madison's submitted renderings contained design elements copied from a small theater renovation completed in Oregon. Metadata showed the files had been downloaded before her submission. She claimed the images were reference material accidentally included in the final portfolio. The department suspended her admission for 1 semester and required her to reapply with original work. Because she was no longer enrolled, the trust could not legally pay tuition. Madison called this proof that I had sabotaged her. In reality, I had no role in the university's findings. Her own files did. The apartment deadline expired. She failed to secure another guarantor and lost the unit. She also lost the non-refundable application fee she had paid personally. My parents allowed her to remain in their home, but that arrangement deteriorated quickly. Madison had spent weeks telling them the apartment was guaranteed. She had already ordered furniture, scheduled movers, and announced her new address to friends. Now boxes filled their hallway, and every inconvenience became my fault. My father called Ethan directly, expecting solidarity. He told him that marriage should bring families together, not divide them. Ethan replied that the division had occurred when Madison attacked us, and my father comforted her before checking whether anyone was injured. He also said future communication should go through me, not around me. My father never called him again. Over the next month, the financial consequences became unavoidable. The venue sought payment for damaged glassware, cleanup, and structural repairs to the dessert station. The bakery demanded replacement costs for its equipment. The catering assistant's treatment was minor, but her lost wages and medical expenses still had to be covered. Madison's freelance staging company removed her from 2 projects after clients learned about the incident and the university review. They did not fire her because I asked them to. I never contacted them. They decided that someone who destroyed a professional event and submitted disputed portfolio work created reputational risk. My parents paid part of her legal consultation and asked me to use trust funds for the rest. I refused because legal defense was not an educational expense. My father accused me of enjoying her collapse. I did not enjoy it. Revenge fantasies are simple because they end at the satisfying moment. Reality continues. I watched my parents drain savings to protect an adult who still refused responsibility. I watched Madison become more isolated as each person she contacted asked the same question: why did you push the cake? She offered explanations about childhood favoritism, financial pressure, and emotional distress. Some people sympathized. Then they repeated the question. She never had an answer that changed the act itself. Eventually, the catering assistant agreed not to pursue criminal charges if Madison paid restitution and completed an anger management program. The venue settled its claim through insurance, but Madison remained responsible for a significant deductible and repair costs. The university permitted her to reapply the following year, provided she completed an academic integrity course and submitted entirely new work. The trust remained intact. The money was still available for legitimate education. What disappeared was her assumption that access would continue without accountability. 3 months after the wedding, Madison sent me an email with the subject line, "You won." The message contained only 4 sentences. I lost the apartment. I lost school. Mom and Dad look at me differently. I hope it was worth it. I replied once. You lost the apartment because you could not qualify without my guarantee. Your admission was suspended because of your portfolio. Mom and Dad witnessed what you did. None of those outcomes required me to lie about you. She never answered. 6 months after the wedding, Ethan and I returned to San Aurelio Station for a preservation fundraiser. The dessert station had been repaired. No trace of the broken cake remained except a faint mark on one section of restored tile. I stood near it longer than I expected. For weeks after the wedding, I had replayed the moment Madison pushed the cake and my father hugged her. Eventually, I realized the cake was not the image that hurt most. It was his instinctive choice. He saw destruction and moved first to protect the person who caused it. My parents remained in contact with me, but our relationship changed. I stopped answering calls that began with pressure, guilt, or reports about Madison's emotional condition. I no longer mediated arguments, paid emergency expenses, or explained rules everyone already understood. My mother apologized for asking me to see Madison's side before acknowledging what had happened to me. Her apology was imperfect. She still described her behavior as panic rather than favoritism, but she began counseling and admitted that protecting Madison from consequences had made her less capable, not safer. My father took longer. He believed family loyalty meant handling harm privately. I asked him why privacy always protected the person causing the harm rather than the person absorbing it. He had no answer. Nearly a year after the wedding, he met me for coffee and said, I thought if I could calm her down, the rest of us would recover. I told him, the rest of us were expected to recover because you never required her to repair anything. That was the first conversation in which he listened without defending himself. Madison completed the court-recommended program and moved into a modest studio she qualified for using her own income. She did not leave New Mexico in disgrace, and she did not become permanently unemployable. Consequences are rarely as cinematic as revenge stories suggest. She lost opportunities, money, trust, and relationships, but she was still capable of rebuilding. The difference was that rebuilding now required her effort. The following year, she reapplied to the graduate program with a new portfolio. The university accepted her provisionally. My attorney confirmed her enrollment and authorized the first tuition payment directly to the school. I did not call her. I did not demand gratitude. Administering the trust correctly was never supposed to be a weapon. Several weeks later, I received a handwritten note. Madison did not apologize for everything. She wrote that she still believed our parents had compared us unfairly and that my control of the trust had intensified her resentment. Then she added, "None of that made me push the cake. I did that because I wanted you to feel publicly ruined. Dad protecting me made me think I had succeeded. Losing the apartment was the first time I understood that you were no longer going to help me escape what I chose." It was the first honest statement she had given me. I did not invite her back into my life immediately. A truthful letter is a beginning, not proof of transformation. Ethan and I agreed that any future contact would be gradual, structured, and free from financial dependence. We met her once in a public cafe. She apologized to Ethan and repaid a small portion of the reception damages. She did not ask me to forgive her. I appreciated that more than a dramatic plea. People sometimes ask whether canceling the tuition deposit and withdrawing from the lease was revenge. I understand why it looked that way. The actions happened hours after the wedding, and the timing created immediate pain. But I did not take her inheritance, block her education permanently, post videos to humiliate her, or pressure employers to reject her. I stopped exposing my finances and legal responsibility to someone who had just demonstrated escalating hostility toward me. I allowed existing rules to operate without bending them in her favor. That distinction changed my understanding of boundaries. A boundary is not a threat designed to control another person. It is a statement about what you will no longer provide, fund, conceal, or endure. Madison was free to believe I was selfish. My parents were free to support her. They were not entitled to use my money, credit, reputation, or silence to make their choices easier. My wedding was not ruined. The cake was ruined. Part of the reception was interrupted. Several photographs captured faces filled with shock instead of joy. But Ethan and I still made our vows. Our friends stayed. The band played again. People ate ordinary sheet cake from paper-thin slices, and it tasted better than the elaborate display because no one had to pretend the evening was perfect. The lesson I carried forward was not that family members should be discarded whenever they make mistakes. It was that love without accountability becomes permission. Compassion does not require financing someone's destructive choices. Forgiveness does not require restoring access. And peace does not come from convincing everyone that your boundary is fair. Sometimes peace begins when you stop arguing and allow the answer to remain no.
Thank you for staying with us through this story. All characters, conversations, and situations are fictional and created only for entertainment, education, and storytelling value. We hope it reminds you that someone else's betrayal may change how you trust, but it does not have to destroy your ability to love yourself. You can become more careful without becoming cold.